You didn't stumble into this moment by accident. You didn't just wake up one day and realize that something in you had been reshaped without cause. What you walked through wasn't random, and it wasn't wasted. There was a season in your life that very few people understood, a stretch of time where even your closest voices couldn't explain what was happening to you, and some of them quietly stepped back because they didn't recognize the version of you that was being formed. That season wasn't meant to be explained to people. It was known only to God, because only God could be trusted with what was happening inside you. There were days when you questioned your own strength, nights when silence felt louder than noise, moments when prayers felt like they were rising into a closed sky. And yet, you kept moving, not because you felt powerful, but because something deeper than emotion was carrying you forward. You learned how to function while broken, how to smile while rebuilding, how to keep your faith intact, while everything familiar was being stripped away. That kind of endurance doesn't come from personality, it comes from purpose. You didn't just survive that season, you were altered by it. There were things God needed to remove that could not coexist with where you're going. Certain attachments had to loosen, certain dependencies had to fall apart, certain illusions had to shatter, and God didn't explain it to you while it was happening, because explanations would have made you resist the process. So he let you walk through confusion while he handled the clarity. He let you feel lost while he secured your future. He let you feel small while he was expanding your capacity. That season humbled you in ways success never could. It taught you to stop leaning on applause and start listening for instruction. It forced you to sit with yourself, to confront thoughts you used to outrun, to face wounds you once buried under busyness. You learned how to be alone without being empty, how to be quiet without feeling abandoned. And in that stillness, something sacred happened. Your discernment sharpened. Your tolerance for surface-level connections faded. Your hunger for truth deepened. People might think you changed because of pain, but the truth is you changed because of revelation. Pain was just the doorway. On the other side was a clearer understanding of who you are and who you are not. You stopped begging for validation from people who were never assigned to affirm you. You stopped explaining yourself to those who only listened to respond, not to understand. You stopped shrinking to fit rooms that were never built for your calling. There were moments in that season when you felt overlooked, forgotten, even bypassed. You watched others advance while you felt stuck. Watched doors open for people who hadn't endured what you endured. But what you couldn't see then is that God was protecting you from premature exposure. He was keeping you hidden, not because you weren't ready, but because the environment wasn't. Some platforms would have crushed you before you were strengthened. Some opportunities would have distracted you before you were rooted. So God covered you with obscurity while he refined you with pressure. What you passed through taught you restraint. It taught you patience. It taught you how to wait without growing bitter. And that lesson alone separated you from many who quit too early. You learned that silence is sometimes preparation, not rejection. That delay is often alignment, not denial. That God's timing is not about making you comfortable, but about making you complete. There were tears you never explained, prayers you whispered because you didn't have the energy to shout. There were days when faith wasn't loud or confident, it was simply choosing not to give up. And heaven counted every one of those moments. Nothing went unnoticed. Not the nights you stayed up questioning, not the mornings you got up anyway, not the private battles you won without witnesses. God saw all of it. That difficult season trained you to hear God without external confirmation. You learned how to trust his voice even when it contradicted your circumstances. You learned how to obey without guarantees, how to move without applause, and that is rare. Many people say they trust God, but few trust him when obedience costs them comfort, relationships, or clarity. You did, even when it hurt, even when it didn't make sense. You didn't come out of that season reckless. You came out refined. You don't speak as quickly as you once did. You don't react as emotionally. You observe more. You pray more. You weigh decisions differently. That's not fear. That's wisdom earned through fire. You know now that not every open door is an invitation, and not every closed door is a setback. You've learned to ask better questions, to seek peace instead of pressure, to choose alignment over approval. Some people will never understand why you move the way you move now. They'll say you're distant, guarded, changed. What they don't realize is that you're stewarding what God entrusted to you in the wilderness. You can't afford to be careless with your heart anymore. You can't afford to pour into places that drain you without replenishing you. That season taught you boundaries, and boundaries are not walls, they are gates. They protect what's sacred while allowing what's assigned to enter. You carry a quiet authority now, not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. It comes from having nothing left to prove, from having already lost what you thought you needed and discovering that God was enough, from realizing that your identity isn't tied to outcomes, but to obedience. That kind of authority can't be faked and it can't be rushed. What you walked through also gave you compassion. You see pain differently now. You don't judge quickly because you remember how misunderstood you felt. You don't dismiss struggles because you know how heavy unseen battles can be. You become a safe place for others, not because you have all the answers, but because you know how to sit with someone in the dark without trying to rush them into the light. That season was not punishment. It was preparation. God was building depth in you because where he's taking you requires more than surface faith. It requires resilience, discernment, and humility. It requires someone who can stand firm when praised and stay grounded when criticized. Someone who knows how to hear God in the noise and in the silence. Someone who won't abandon their values when pressure increases. You might still be unpacking parts of what you went through. Healing doesn't happen all at once, and understanding often comes in layers. But even now, you can sense that something new is emerging. Not rushed, not forced, but steady. Doors are aligning. Conversations are shifting. Opportunities are approaching differently than before. And this time, you're not chasing them. You're watching, praying, discerning. The season that only God knew about created a version of you that can carry what's coming without losing yourself. You won't idolize the blessing because you've already learned how to live without it. You won't compromise your character to maintain momentum because you know how quickly things can fall apart when they're built on the wrong foundation. You won't confuse attention with assignment or popularity with purpose. There's a calm in you now that wasn't there before, not because life is perfect, but because your trust is deeper. You've seen what happens when everything familiar is shaken, and you've learned that God remains steady, that knowledge anchors you, it steadies your steps. It keeps you from panicking when plans change or timelines stretch. You are not behind. You are not late. You are not disqualified because of how hard it was. If anything, that season qualified you. It proved that you could endure without becoming bitter, that you could wait without losing faith, that you could be corrected without becoming defensive. Those are the marks of someone God can entrust with influence, with responsibility, with impact. What's next will not look like what you imagined back then. Your dreams have matured. Your prayers have shifted. You're no longer asking just for outcomes, you're asking for alignment. You're no longer desperate for answers, you're committed to obedience. And that shift alone tells you how far you've come. There will be moments ahead that remind you of that difficult season, not to re-traumatize you, but to remind you of your resilience, to remind you that you've already survived worse than this, that you've already walked through confusion and come out with clarity, that the same God who carried you then is still guiding you now. You don't need to announce what you've been through. You don't need to explain your growth. The fruit will speak, the peace will speak, the consistency will speak. And when the time is right, God will reveal why he kept that season hidden, why he allowed you to walk through it quietly, why he trusted you with pain that others might not have survived. Because what he's preparing you for requires someone who knows how to trust him when no one else sees what he's doing. Someone who can walk by faith without needing constant reassurance. Someone who understands that the hardest seasons often precede the greatest clarity. And even now, as you stand on the edge of what feels like a new chapter, you can sense that the weight you carried before has begun to shift. That the pressure that once felt overwhelming is giving way to a deeper strength. And that everything you endured is quietly aligning to serve a purpose that is still unfolding. A purpose that is still unfolding in ways you couldn't have handled back then. Because if God had shown you everything at once, it would have crushed you under the weight of responsibility before you had the strength to carry it. So he revealed things slowly, layer by layer, season by season, letting your capacity grow before your calling expanded. What felt like delay was actually mercy. What felt like isolation was protection. What felt like silence was instruction without distraction. There were moments when you felt like you were losing yourself, but what was really happening was the shedding of versions that could no longer follow you into what's next. Old habits, old mindsets, old coping mechanisms had to fall away. God wasn't interested in polishing who you used to be. He was committed to transforming you into who you needed to become. And transformation is rarely comfortable. It stretches you, it confronts you. It requires surrender where you once relied on control. You learn that faith isn't proven in public victories, but in private obedience. In choosing integrity when compromise would have been easier, in staying aligned when shortcuts were available, in trusting God's pace when your impatience was screaming. Those decisions shaped you more than any visible achievement ever could. They rewired your instincts, they refined your discernment, they taught you that not everything urgent is important, and not everything important arrives with urging. You began to notice how differently you respond now. Situations that once triggered anxiety now invite prayer. Delays that once frustrated you now signal redirection. Criticism that once wounded you now reveals more about the speaker than about you. That didn't happen overnight. That came from walking through a season where you had to learn emotional discipline, spiritual maturity, and internal stability. God taught you how to govern yourself before trusting you with influence over anything else. There were lessons in disappointment that success could never teach. Disappointment stripped away entitlement and replaced it with gratitude. It taught you to appreciate progress instead of demanding perfection. It helped you see that God's favor doesn't always look like open doors. Sometimes it looks like closed ones that save you from yourself. And because of that, you now approach life with a quieter confidence, a steadier pace, a deeper trust. You stopped chasing things that looked impressive but felt empty. You started paying attention to what brought peace instead of applause. That shift changed everything. It changed how you choose relationships, how you spend your time, how you define success. You're no longer driven by comparison because that difficult season exposed how dangerous it is to measure your journey against someone else's timeline. You learned that God works personally, not generically. What you went through also sharpened your spiritual perception. You can sense misalignment faster now. You can tell when something looks right but feels wrong. You're less impressed by words and more attentive to patterns. That's not skepticism, that's wisdom. That's the fruit of walking closely with God through uncertainty and learning how He speaks beneath the surface of situations. There were prayers you prayed back then that God didn't answer the way you expected. At the time, it felt like rejection. Now you're beginning to see it as redirection. Some things you asked for would have locked you into environments that couldn't sustain your growth. Some connections you wanted would have limited your reach. God said no, not because you were asking for too much, but because you were asking for something too small compared to what He had in mind. You also learned how to forgive without reconciliation, how to release without explanation, how to move forward without closure. That was one of the hardest lessons. Because part of you wanted understanding, wanted acknowledgement, wanted validation for the pain you endured, but God taught you that closure doesn't always come from conversations. It often comes from acceptance, from deciding that your healing doesn't require someone else's awareness or apology. That decision freed you. It freed your energy. It freed your focus. It allowed you to stop rehearsing old wounds and start investing in present alignment. And with that freedom came clarity. You began to see opportunities you couldn't see before because your vision was no longer clouded by resentment or regret. You began to recognize divine timing instead of forcing human outcomes. You're standing differently now, not rushed, not desperate, not frantic. There's a groundedness in you that didn't exist before, a sense that even if things don't happen the way you expect, you'll be okay. That confidence isn't arrogance, it's assurance. Assurance that you're held, that you're guided, that you're not walking alone, even when the path feels quiet. God used that hidden season to build your endurance, not just the ability to endure hardship, but the ability to endure blessing without losing humility, to endure recognition without forgetting who you were when no one was watching, to endure momentum without abandoning discernment. That kind of endurance is rare, and it's necessary for longevity. You don't crave attention the way you once did. You crave alignment. You don't need everyone to understand you. You need to be obedient. That shift alone tells you that you're no longer operating from insecurity, but from identity. You know who you are even when circumstances fluctuate. You know what you carry even when results take time to manifest. That difficult season also revealed the difference between companionship and assignment. You learned that not everyone who walks with you is meant to stay with you. Some people were there to teach you, others to test you, others to reveal parts of yourself you needed to confront. And when their role ended, you learned how to let go without bitterness. You learned how to honor the lesson without clinging to the relationship. There's a quiet gratitude in you now for what didn't work out, for doors that closed, for plans that fell apart, because you can see how each disappointment redirected you towards something more aligned. You might not have all the details yet, but you trust the direction. And trust changes how you walk. It slows you down. It steadies your steps. It removes the need to force outcomes. You're more comfortable with mystery now, more willing to move without full visibility. That doesn't mean you're reckless. It means you've learned how to rely on God's guidance instead of your own understanding. You've seen enough to know that clarity often comes after obedience, not before. That understanding reshaped how you approach decisions. You pray differently, you wait differently, you listen differently. That season also taught you the value of stillness, not as inactivity, but as awareness. In stillness, you learned how to hear subtle nudges, how to recognize when to act and when to pause. You learned that silence isn't empty. It's full of instruction if you're willing to listen. And now, Even in busy seasons, you know how to find that stillness within. You carry less urgency and more intention, less fear and more focus, less noise and more depth. Those shifts didn't come from ease, they came from endurance, from walking through something you couldn't explain but chose to trust anyway. That choice marked you. It aligned you with a level of faith that isn't shaken easily. There are people who will meet you now and never know what it cost you to become this steady, this discerning, this grounded. They'll see the confidence but not the confusion that preceded it, the peace but not the pressure, the wisdom but not the wounds. And that's okay. That season wasn't meant to be displayed, it was meant to be formative. What's ahead will require everything you learned back then: the patience, the restraint, the discernment, the humility. You won't have to scramble to become ready when the moment arrives, because you've already been prepared in private. You've already been shaped in silence. You've already been strengthened in obscurity. You're no longer intimidated by slow progress because you understand its value. You know that anything built too quickly can collapse just as fast. And you're not interested in short-lived momentum. You're building for longevity, for impact that lasts beyond seasons and trends, for influence rooted in authenticity, not performance. Even now, you can feel a shift happening internally. Not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. A sense of readiness mixed with patience, expectation without anxiety, hope without desperation. That balance is the evidence of growth, the evidence that the difficult season did its work. You don't romanticize what you went through, but you don't resent it either. You respect it, because it introduced you to a version of yourself that could survive loss without losing faith, uncertainty without losing direction, delay without losing purpose. That version of you is the foundation for everything that's coming. You've learned that God often does his deepest work in hidden places, that he speaks loudest when distractions are removed, that he shapes most intentionally when no one else is watching. And because of that, you don't fear quiet seasons anymore. You recognize them as invitations, not interruptions. You know now that your worth isn't measured by productivity, your value isn't determined by visibility, and your calling isn't validated by external approval. Those truths anchor you when circumstances fluctuate. They keep you grounded when things accelerate and steady when things slow down. There will be moments ahead when you're tempted to rush, to compare, to question. But you'll remember what you survived. You'll remember how God carried you through on fusion before, how he guided you through darkness without revealing the full path. And that memory will steady you again. You are not who you were before that season, and you were never meant to be. You were refined, redirected, repositioned. And even though you may not yet see the full picture, you can trust that nothing you endured was wasted. Every tear watered something. Every delay protected something. Every lonely moment strengthened something. And as you continue moving forward step by step, choice by choice, trusting even when clarity unfolds slowly, you'll begin to notice that the things that once drained you no longer have power over you, that the doubts that once echoed loudly now fade faster, that your confidence is no longer rooted in outcomes but in obedience, and that the season once known only to God has quietly prepared you for moments that are just beginning to take shape in ways that feel both familiar and completely new at the same time. Familiar because deep down, your spirit always knew there was more, and new because you couldn't have imagined the path God would use to bring you here. What once felt like a detour now reveals itself as alignment. What once felt like loss now shows signs of protection. And what once felt like silence now echoes with understanding. You're beginning to recognize that the strength you carry now is quieter, steadier, and far more durable than the loud confidence you once chased. Back then, you needed reassurance. You needed signs. You needed people to confirm what God had already spoken. But that difficult season weaned you off dependence on external validation. It taught you how to stand on ion instead of consensus. And conviction will take you farther than agreement ever could. You notice now how intentional you've become with your energy. You no longer pour into spaces that drain you without purpose. You no longer chase conversations that feel forced or connections that require you to shrink. You're not angry about it. You're simply aware. Awareness replaced anxiety. Discernment replaced desperation. And peace replaced pressure. That season taught you that not everything deserves a response. Some things are meant to be observed, prayed over, and released. You learned that reacting quickly often comes from insecurity, while responding intentionally comes from confidence. And that confidence wasn't given to you. It was built through endurance. There were moments back then when you felt invisible, when your efforts went unnoticed and your sacrifices unacknowledged. But what you didn't know is that invisibility was part of your training. It taught you how to serve without spotlight, how to remain faithful without affirmation, how to stay committed when motivation faded. Those lessons shaped your character in ways public recognition never could. You've also learned how to sit with unanswered questions without allowing them to erode your faith. You discovered that doubt doesn't disqualify you. It can deepen you if you bring it to God instead of letting it isolate you. You stopped pretending to have it all together and started being honest in God's presence. And honesty changed the way you pray. Your prayers became less polished and more powerful, less scripted and more surrendered. You began to understand that God isn't intimidated by your questions or disappointed by your weariness. He was patient with you in that season because patience was what he was developing in you. He let you wrestle because wrestling builds intimacy when it's rooted in trust. And even when you didn't feel close to him, he was closer than you realized. That realization shifts something in you now. It makes you less afraid of future uncertainty because you've already seen how God operates when clarity is withheld. You know now that he doesn't abandon you in confusion. He guides you through it. He teaches you how to listen deeper, how to notice subtle direction, how to trust his character when you can't trace his hand. You're no longer shocked when plans change. You've learned to hold expectations loosely while holding faith firmly. That balance protects your heart. It allows you to hope without becoming crushed when things unfold differently. It allows you to dream without idolizing outcomes. And that emotional maturity came at a cost, but it was worth it. The difficult season also refined your voice. You speak with more intention now. You choose words carefully because you understand their weight. You know how silence can be just as powerful as speech. You're not trying to impress, you're trying to be accurate. You're not trying to be heard by everyone. You're trying to speak truth where it matters. That shift makes your presence felt even when you say very little. You've noticed how people respond to you differently now. Some are drawn to your calm, others are unsettled by your clarity. That's normal. Growth changes dynamics. When you stop operating from need, those who thrived on your dependence may feel uncomfortable. When you stop explaining yourself, those who relied on your justification may feel threatened. But you're not responsible for managing others' reactions to your evolution. You've made peace with the fact that not everyone will celebrate the version of you that emerged from that season. Some preferred you when you were unsure, when you were accessible to their influence, when you doubted yourself more than you should have. But you didn't go through everything you went through just to remain small for the comfort of others. You were shaped for something greater, even if that greatness requires distance. That season also taught you how to recognize divine restraint. There were times God held you back even when you felt capable of moving forward. And now you understand why. Moving ahead without alignment would have cost you more than waiting ever did. God was teaching you that speed without direction is dangerous and momentum without purpose is empty. You become comfortable with pacing, with letting things unfold instead of forcing them open, with trusting that what's meant for you will find you in the right season, not just the right desire. That trust keeps you grounded when impatience tries to creep back in. You don't feel the need to rush your growth anymore. You respect process now. You honor the time it takes to become rooted, to heal fully, to grow wisely. You understand that quick results often skip necessary refinement. And you're not willing to sacrifice depth for speed. There's also a tenderness in you that wasn't there before. Not weakness, but sensitivity. You're more attuned to your spirit, more aware of emotional shifts, more responsive to subtle warnings. That sensitivity is a gift. For it allows you to course correct early instead of repairing damage later. It allows you to recognize misalignment before it becomes pain. You've learned how to rest without guilt, how to pause without feeling unproductive. That alone marks a deep internal shift. You're no longer defined by constant output. You understand that rest is not laziness, it's stewardship. And stewardship matters when God entrusts you with more. The season known only to God also reshaped how you see him. You no longer see him as distant or transactional. You've experienced him as present, patient, and precise. You know now that he doesn't waste suffering and he doesn't rush formation. He's far more invested in who you're becoming than in how quickly you arrive. That understanding anchors you when things don't make sense. It keeps you steady when prayers seem unanswered. It reminds you that God's silence is often purposeful, not absent. And because of that, you don't panic when things get quiet. You listen. You're more discerning about opportunities now. You don't jump at every open door. You ask whether it aligns with your values, your peace, your assignment. You've learned that not every opportunity is a blessing, and not every blessing looks like an opportunity at first. That wisdom protects you from unnecessary detours. You've also learned how to celebrate progress without becoming complacent. You acknowledge how far you've come, but you remain teachable. You stay humble because you remember what it felt like to be unsure, to be waiting, to be stretched. That memory keeps you grounded. There are moments when you look back and barely recognize the person you were before that season. No, because they were weak, but because they were untested. Life hadn't yet demanded what God knew was inside you. That season drew it out. It revealed resilience you didn't know you had, faith you didn't know you could sustain, patience you didn't know you could practice. You now understand that God sometimes allows what he could easily prevent in order to develop what cannot be taught any other way. Strength, wisdom, discernment, humility, these are learned through experience, not explanation. And you were willing to learn even when it hurt. As you move forward, you carry that learning quietly. You don't lead with your scars, but you don't hide them either. They inform you, they ground you, they remind you of what matters, and they keep you aligned when distractions arise. You're no longer chasing clarity, you're walking in trust. You're no longer demanding timelines, you're honoring seasons. You're no longer afraid of the unknown. You've already met God there. And because of that, you move forward with a steadiness that doesn't need to announce itself. Even now, as new responsibilities begin to surface and new expectations take shape, you can feel how different you are. You're not overwhelmed by the weight because you were strengthened in private. You're not intimidated by the scope because you were trained in silence. And you're not anxious about sustaining it because you learned how to depend on God when nothing else was stable. The season that only God knew about wasn't meant to break you. It was meant to build you in ways that visibility never could. And as you continue walking, trusting, listening, and aligning, you'll keep discovering that everything you endured, woven into who you are now, guiding how you choose, how you lead, how you love, and how you remain faithful, even as the road ahead continues to unfold with a quiet certainty that no longer needs to be proven to anyone but you and God. There's a steadiness in your steps now that comes from having already walked through instability and survived it. You don't flinch at uncertainty the way you used to. You don't panic when things feel undefined. You've learned that undefined does not mean unprotected. It often means God is still shaping the details while asking you to trust the direction. You understand now that not every season is meant to be understood while you're inside it. Some seasons only make sense in hindsight, when you can see how each moment was connected, how every delay redirected you, how every closed door forced you to strengthen muscles you didn't even know you'd need. That difficult season gave you perspective, and perspective changes everything. It keeps you from reacting emotionally to temporary situations. It helps you respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. It anchors you when others are shaken. You're no longer trying to outrun discomfort. You've learned how to sit with it, learn from it, and move through it without letting it define you. That's growth. That's maturity. And that didn't come from ease or convenience. It came from staying present when it would have been easier to escape, from staying faithful when it would have been easier to numb yourself, from staying hopeful when it would have been easier to quit. You learned how to be honest with yourself during that season, honest about your limits, honest about your fears. Hone, ST about your desires. And that honesty stripped away pretense. It removed the pressure to perform. It allowed you to show up as you are instead of who you thought you needed to be. And in that authenticity, God met you in a deeper way than before. You don't pretend anymore. You don't exaggerate your strength or minimize your struggles. You've discovered that real power doesn't come from pretending you're unbreakable. It comes from knowing you can bend without breaking. That knowledge makes you resilient. It allows you to take risks without fear of collapse because you trust your ability to recover. The season known only to God also taught you how to release control without losing direction. You realized that holding too tightly was exhausting you, not protecting you. So you loosened your grip. You stopped micromanaging outcomes. You started trusting God with details you once tried to handle yourself. And in that release, you found rest. You're more present now, more aware of moments instead of constantly rushing to the next milestone. You savor progress instead of dismissing it. You celebrate growth instead of waiting for perfection. That shift has brought joy back into places where pressure once lived. And joy, you've learned, is not dependent on circumstances. It's rooted in alignment. You've also learned how to recognize when something is no longer serving your growth. You don't cling to familiar discomfort just because it's known. You don't stay stuck out of loyalty to past versions of yourself. You've learned that honoring where you've been doesn't require staying there, and that realization freed you to move forward without guilt. There were moments in that sea, son, when you felt like you were standing still while the world moved around you. But now you see that stillness wasn't stagnation, it was recalibration. God was adjusting your internal compass so you wouldn't get lost when movement resumed. He was aligning your heart, your motives, your priorities. And alignment takes time. You don't rush decisions now because you know how costly misalignment can be. You ask deeper questions. You wait for peace instead of pressure. You listen for confirmation instead of chasing excitement. That doesn't make you passive, it makes you intentional. And intention leads to outcomes that last. You've become someone who can sit in rooms without needing to dominate them, someone who can contribute without competing, someone who can lead without forcing authority. That quiet confidence is the result of inner work, not external success. It comes from knowing who you are even when no one affirms it. You're also more selective with your trust, not closed off, but discerning. You've learned that trust is built over time through consistency, not words. And because of that, you invest more wisely. You pour into relationships that are reciprocal, environments that are healthy, pursuits that align with your values. The difficult season also sharpened your ability to hear your own intuition, that inner witness shaped by prayer, reflection, and experience. You recognize when something feels off, even if it looks right on paper. You honor that signal now. You don't override it for convenience or approval. That discernment has saved you from repeating old patterns. You no longer romanticize struggle, but you don't fear it either. You know now that hardship doesn't automatically mean you're off track. Sometimes it means you're being stretched to carry more. And that understanding keeps you steady when challenges arise. You don't immediately assume something is wrong. You ask what's being formed. You've learned how to adapt without compromising your core. You can adjust your approach without abandoning your principles. That flexibility makes you effective without making you fragile. It allows you to navigate change without losing yourself. There's also a humility in you now that wasn't forced, it was earned. You know how quickly things can shift. You know how little control you truly have. And instead of making you anxious, that knowledge makes you grateful. It keeps you dependent on God, not self-sufficient in a way that isolates you. You're more compassionate with yourself now. You don't punish yourself for not knowing what you couldn't have known. You don't shame yourself for choices made with limited understanding. You honor your growth instead of replaying regrets. That self-compassion has unlocked healing you didn't realize was still needed. You've also become more patient with others. You understand that everyone is carrying something unseen. You don't rush people through their process because you remember how much grace you needed in yours. That patience makes you a safe presence, someone others can trust without fear of judgment. You don't need to announce your readiness. You don't need to prove your preparation. When you know the timing will reveal it. God will position you where your growth is evident without explanation. And when that happens, it won't feel overwhelming. It will feel aligned. You're no longer chase-eye affirmation. You're walking in agreement with what God has already spoken over your life. That agreement steadies you. It keeps you from being swayed by opinions that don't understand your journey. It anchors you when feedback is mixed or delayed. You've learned that consistency matters more than intensity, that showing up steadily builds more than sporadic bursts of effort. That lesson will carry you far. It will sustain you when motivation dips and challenges arise. It will keep you moving when excitement fades. You're also more aware of your internal rhythms. You know when to push and when to pause, when to speak and when to stay silent, when to act and when to wait. That awareness keeps you balanced. It prevents burnout. It allows you to move with wisdom instead of impulse. The season known only to God gave you an inner compass that doesn't rely on external markers. You don't need constant reassurance to keep going. You trust the direction even when progress feels subtle. And that trust keeps you moving forward without losing heart. You don't measure success the way you once did. You value peace over praise, alignment over attention, faithfulness over flash. Those values shape your decisions now. They guide your priorities. They protect your purpose. As you continue walking, you'll notice that the things that once intimidated you now feel manageable. Not because they're smaller, but because you're stronger. You've been fortified in ways that don't show up immediately, but they reveal themselves under pressure. You carry a quiet resilience that allows you to face uncertainty without panic, criticism without collapse, delay without despair. That resilience was forged in a season that didn't make sense at the time, but it makes all the difference now. You're no longer afraid of being unseen because you know that God sees you fully. You're no longer anxious about timing because you've learned how precise his timing is. You're no longer desperate for clarity because you trust the one who guides your steps. And as you keep moving forward, trusting, discerning, staying aligned even when the path unfolds slowly, you'll continue to realize that the difficult season, known only to God, didn't just prepare you for what's next. It reshaped how you walk into it with steadiness, wisdom, humility, and a deep-rooted trust that continues to carry you further into what is still emerging. And now, as you stand where you are, you don't need proof to believe. And you don't need noise to feel secure. You know deep in your spirit that what you walked through was not meant to destroy you, but to define you. The season that only God knew about carved depth into your faith, clarity into your vision, and strength into your character. You emerged without bitterness, without entitlement, without fear of the unknown, carrying a quiet confidence that cannot be shaken by circumstances or opinions. You are no longer waiting to become ready. You were made ready in the dark. And as the next chapter unfolds, you will walk into it steady, discerning, and aligned, not rushing ahead of God and not lagging behind him, fully aware that everything you endured has positioned you to carry what is coming with humility, wisdom, and unwavering trust.